Hey, welcome back. It's Food, News, and Chews Radio, sponsored by Sullivan University. Good afternoon, everybody. Sylvia Lovely, Jeremy Ashby.
Hello there.
We're going to talk, we got a lot of things to talk about today, but today, obviously, this is Holy Week and tomorrow's Easter.
Yeah.
In the second half of the show, we're going to have Reverend John Hall from the Good Sheppard Episcopal Church on to talk about biblical foods.
Yeah, talking from that beautiful church on Belcourt.
It's gorgeous.
It looks like a church. I love churches that look like churches.
We got a lot of things to talk about today. You were talking about a lot of bread. You mentioned
bread. I did a lot of looking at bread, and bread is in every culture, and it figures so prominently in the Bible, which is what we're going to talk about. Because we're going to talk about the 7 foods of the Bible, but prominent among them are wheat, barley, and one of the things I don't see listed on the 7 foods of the Bible are beans and legumes. Those were pretty popular too, and making bread out of. How can you do that, Jeremy? Can you make bread out of legumes?
Yeah, you can.
You can make bread out of anything.
And think about this, guys, too. Bread's a loose term. What we're, I think, referring to is the grain breads like wheat.
Yeah.
Because, you can make cornbread, but of course corn wasn't even discovered until the New World, right?
Sure.
So, it's, I guess, the wheat ones and the history of how that came together, that always fascinated me, how I don't even know how bread was invented. It seemed like it's a mistake. Like somebody mixed some grain or it got wet and it sat over there and grew or molded from the yeast. How did it
other than
who would
grilled
eat that?
Meat, it would be the oldest food there is. It's the most basic food there is.
I would think. It's all stuff that grew on trees or plants and stuff like that.
Well, I have a hard enough time baking bread myself.
Right.
I'm trying to think of how you would do it back then, just stumbling across this process.
Well, I don't think like you said, I don't think what we think of as bread is what was.
It's probably not what they did.
Bread, like you said, was a very loose term because I imagine most of the bread was a ground grain, which could have been a bean,
and maybe put beans and grind those up.
Put whatever you can.
Well, there's a
big
trend now for lentil. One of the biggest recipes, like TikTok recipes this year, is lentil bread.
Really?
You soak lentils in water. You can get that. You can go online and find it. You soak lentils in water, run it through a blender, make a batter out of it, and just
I guess
fry
that's
it
true.
like a
Make it
pancake.
pasty.
It's the same process for the beans.
Yeah.
Like sweet potato breads, potato
Well,
breads.
that's true.
Yeah, you're
That's
using
true.
the mash.
Gnocchi is bread.
Gnocchi, yeah, you're using the mash, and you're using a little bit of grain flour in there to help bind it. It's typically, if they're, most breads are not egg-based, that's cake.
Yeah, and when we say bread, I'm sure they didn't have, artisan sourdough French bread back then. They were, it was a very basic thing.
I always think of it as
and
like
there wouldn't be mills,
flatbread.
so you'd got to have rough, whole grains in
a lot
there.
of rye,
And
whole rye.
I think of like naan bread as being part of the Middle East, or is that where naan comes from, or is
India.
it India?
Yeah,
It's India.
The Middle Eastern flatbreads all through
always think of
India, they're
that.
all very, very similar. In fact, really the only big difference I can tell is more yogurt in the Mediterranean or the Indian based ones, whereas the
Fermented.
Mediterranean's
More
just going to
fat,
be
probably.
And
probably
fermentation.
oil, salt, yeast, flour, water.
Yep. There's a bread from India, fajia or something like that.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That is fermented. So many things from India are fermented.
A lot of also chickpea flours used in breads.
chickpea,
A lot of
you're
chickpea
right.
flours. Middle Eastern bread, from biblical times, when you think that area of the world, that bread was more than likely unleavened, or if it was leavened, it was leavened with natural yeast. They didn't have, you couldn't go to the store and buy yeast, so it was probably a fermented bread because that's how the yeast grew.
That's how they do it.
So I still have trouble to this day with breads. One, because I probably know the difference between a good one and bad one, and it takes a lot of work to produce a really nice loaf of bread in a restaurant kitchen or at a home kitchen. I've got a home kitchen recipe for you.
Please.
If you guys, this is kind of like our family's house bread. This is what we make.
Really?
This is the only one I make. It works for us, and I can use this as a sandwich loaf or dinner bread. You can make this into rolls. You can use this as a pizza dough. Okay,
I like
so
that.
here we go.
Okay,
you got 6 cups of flour, 1 tablespoon of salt, 5 tablespoons of sugar, 1.5 teaspoons or tablespoons of dry yeast, and all you need to do is mix those together. Your dry ingredients. Then you're going to add basically 2 2/3 cups of warm water and mix that in your mixer, right? And that's really it. You don't have to do the dissolving of the yeast if you don't want to, and the extra water. If you want to, you can add the yeast to a little bit of water and a tablespoon of that sugar that was in the recipe and kind of get it blooming if you want it to rise really quick and be done. But typically, this one, I usually let that dough you've made, after you've mixed it for about 5 minutes in the mixer, settle for about 1.5 to 2 hours. Then you're ready to bake. And it bakes up perfectly.
I bet it's really good, too, with that sugar added.
Oh, man, and if you don't want to bake it right now, you could do everything you just said and then put it in the fridge and let it proof for 1 to 2 to 3 or 4 days, and it's just going to get better.
It's going to get better. You're going to get more complex flavors in that dough.
So
but
go ahead.
Check this out. There's what I like about this recipe is I throw things together pretty quickly. This is literally going to take me 5 minutes to mix up, right? But then my oven takes a half hour to heat up. Well, you don't have to preheat your oven for this one, okay? What you're going to do is put a cup of water in, like 1 cup, in a little metal cup or a pan in the bottom of your oven, and then you turn your oven on 400 degrees and put your dough in there and walk away.
Really?
Yeah, and what's going to happen is the moisture in the rise of the temperature in the oven is going to proof your bread quickly. It's, the heat is going to slowly proof it before it bakes, and then the temperature rises enough to start your reactions. So you're going to have that beautiful bowl of brown, lovely bread with that chewy inside.
That sounds delicious.
It's at home every single time this works.
Can you refrigerate yeast dough?
You can.
Or do you ruin it?
No, actually, it helps it. The dough actually gets better. So what happens
stop
is
it from growing.
It won't stop it. It slows it down a lot. Okay. And so that's why if bread proofs on the counter in 2 hours, an hour, 90 minutes, something like that, in a fridge it could take 24 hours to achieve the same loft.
But it doesn't hurt it.
Doesn't hurt it, but it gives it, in that time, the yeast keep growing, but they get, like you said, you get more of those soury, tangy notes the longer it ferments in the fridge. So a lot of bakers use a cold proof.
They do, and you guys should use that at home. One thing to be wary of is watch your yeast amounts. If you look at bigas and pouliches and starters, it's a very minimal amount of yeast. You're giving it a lot of food and letting it kind of grow slowly.
Let me ask you a question. To make sourdough bread, do you use like a basic bread recipe but add something to it?
So you don't have to even do that, Sylvia. Sourdough, you would put your yeast and stuff in the fridge, right?
Right.
Typically, if you want to accelerate some sourdough as that yeast is blooming, leave it out on the counter overnight, and it's going to kind of ferment, so to speak, and get the sour flavors. It's really,
so you don't have to add. What's starter? What is starter?
That's the yeast and water, and flour. You mix it a small amount. It's kind of like a little batter where it just kind of feeds, and then you can add that to another dough later. And
because people have starter that they've kept for generations.
Generations,
right?
yes, absolutely,
yeah. And you keep it in the fridge. You feed it. Depending on how much bread you make, most people keep it in the fridge because it'll grow too fast. And and eventually, if you don't feed it, it'll die even in the fridge.
I love those things though, where there's been starters for generations or decades in restaurants that have never died. Or there's soups like that too in different cultures.
Really?
Yeah, there's. I'm trying to think the name of it, but it's kind of ever-present soup.
It's called a Forever Stew.
You have a cauldron on Forever Stew, and basically every day they just add stuff to it, and they keep it going. And it's kind of it's how you used to run an old inn in the Middle Ages. You always had a cauldron and a pot, and you just kept feeding food to it. You never really washed it out or cleaned it. It
would cook 24 hours a day. You would add meat and water to it, and then someone would eat some.
Kind of like an iron skillet. You just don't ever put soap on it, and you just kind of keep it.
Right, yeah. You just keep it feeding it.
As long as you keep it above, the danger zone levels, they would keep that stew going. Medieval times, they would keep it, like you said, in the inns.
That's amazing. Forever soup. I love that. Yeah. And then there's also there's now almond flour. Oat flour.
Right.
Are those any different from wheat flour? Have you ever had to cook with those?
Yeah, they're totally different. They're just give me flour. I don't know. I am fortunate enough not to have any dietary restrictions where I don't have have to avoid gluten or anything. But there's just no replacement. People are trying to come up with different flours and combinations, and they're doing a great job, but it's still not the real thing.
I mean, it's like with a hamburger versus a turkey burger. You can put anything you want on a turkey burger and make it an amazing turkey burger
or veggie burger.
Yeah, but a plain hamburger, plain beef hamburger is always going to be tastier.
Just don't tell me that you're feeding me a turkey or turkey dog.
Like the real thing is always going to be tastier.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Hey, this leads to milk.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Because you can have almond milk now, you have oat milk now.
Very controversial.
And there is a controversy in the milk industry. They want more young people to drink milk.
Well, there also was a lawsuit over whether or not you could call almond milk or
That's
some of
true.
and I believe that case lost. I believe
we got almond juice.
Yeah. Well, I think the dairy, if I remember correctly, and someone will sure, the dairy industry did not want the makers
That's
of
true.
soy
I remember
to
that
use
now.
the term milk in it. And I think that case was lost, but
So what is the reason for the decline in milk? Is it other alternatives such as soy
That's
and
one of the
almond
things.
milk?
And then the health issues, allergy issues. And you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, my wife, she's a physician, and she deals with allergies as an ENT, and I think she's mentioned several times that, there's studies that milk isn't such a great thing to have after a certain age or to drink all the time for allergy. And I don't know how that translates into your health.
well, we're the only animal or the only being, whatever you want to call us, that drink milk after being a baby.
Yeah, that's right.
Every other species of
And a lot
mammal.
of people can't tolerate it.
Right.
The
And most of the
lactose.
world is lactose intolerant.
Yeah.
Most of the Eastern world, I mean, the Western world, but most people in the Eastern part of the world have some version of lactose intolerant because it's not part of
It's
culture.
not part of what we were designed to do. And so I think that's all that goes into what has become controversial, and the industry's not happy about that.
No, but people are eating milk. They don't know they are. I mean, milk is dairy. I mean,
Everything.
like I use it on so many
True.
things and in so many recipes. It's just the difference is you're not pouring a glass of milk and drinking it
But
with
boy,
dinner.
the old generations, I mean,
Yeah.
my
I grew up-
father-in-law would drink a gigantic glass of milk every night.
Yeah,
and 3 times a day with
Probably
every
till-
meal.
Me too. Till I was 10 years old, I probably drank 2-3 glasses of milk, a day. We'd go through it pretty quickly. I don't know. I mean, but
Well, I
also
also
we
think
had
it was-
commercials when we were growing up, Twitch, that said, hey, I'm drinking milk and
Yeah.
I'm going to be that big
Gonna
dude
be
over there
giant
with a
and tall.
girlfriend.
Well,
So I think a lot of it
building bones,
was-
I think, is part of the issue.
I think it was nutritional supplement, even if we didn't know why. Especially a long time ago, it was more of a nutritional supplement. You drink the milk because it had fat, it had protein,
Had calcium,
and your diet
vitamin
wasn't
D.
probably as good as it is now. I mean, now you could get calcium, protein in a gummy. You can get or I don't drink a lot of milk, but I eat a lot of cheese.
All right, well,
I eat a lot
so
of
Yeah,
you're-
cheese. Yeah.
Right.
Could do
You're
without
eating
that.
milk.
I'm eating milk. I'm not drinking it, but I'm eating it.
Hey, they're going after gamers to get them to drink milk.
To drink milk.
It doesn't seem to go together for me.
Do you like milk? Do you like it?
I don't drink it.
Now, sometimes the
don't.
concept of milk weirds me out.
I know it wears me out too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like
where it comes from, how you get it. It's if I
So-
think about it too
although
long.
with a chocolate chip cookie, there's
Right.
nothing.
So you're like one that's probably, you wouldn't be able to take it straight from the teat.
no,
oh my
you-
gosh,
you-
no.
So you need yours in a factory, labeled in a jug, refrigerated.
I had a friend who
not
grew up on
gonna-
a dairy farm, and he told me there was nothing better than freshly squeezed, warm, like at the temperature it comes out of the cow.
Oh, that would make
And
me gag.
I could not, unpasteurized, full
Yeah,
fat.
raw
Come on,
milk.
Yeah.
you may like it.
It
Yeah,
probably
no,
is
no, no.
delicious. It's probably delicious, but the idea of it, no, thank you.
Yeah, it peaked in milk consumption peaked in 1945. So it's been on decline.
Well,
ever
again,
since.
back then, there was a lot going on in the world. Food, there were rationings. So people probably drink milk because it's got a lot of calories, a lot of fat, a lot of protein, good, easy supplement. You don't have to cook it. It'll stay for a little while at room temperature, and you can,
Well, I find it interesting. You see these industries that they'll do prolonged advertising campaigns. You have the Avocado Board. You had the Dairy Association. What else is out there? The Beef Council, right?
The turkey,
It's like you're talking about major commodities that they're pushing
Sure.
across the board. It's
turkey,
like
chicken,
like eggs eggs are good for you. They're bad for
Right.
you. Eat them.
pork,
don't eat
the
'em.
other white meat. That was a big one for a while.
Here's the answer. Part of the answer to your question: the dairy industry has long waged a battle to keep plant-based alternatives from using the word milk. The Food and Drug Administration in February made it clear that the war is probably over, issuing a draft ruling that drinks made from oats, almonds, or other plants can be called milk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a victory.
But on those hands, like almond milk, I sometimes use that. Not my favorite. It's fine. But like soy milk,
isn't like almond milk? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
you're fine.
The reason we have no water out west.
Yeah, that's true.
It takes an incredible amount. Yeah.
It takes a lot of water.
A lot of water to grow almonds.
Apparently,
It's one of the hardest plants to grow.
Yeah.
Back to your point, though, I get more gag-worthy over almond or oat milk. They're just something, because is it white?
Yeah.
That just would bother me.
Almond milk I'm okay with. To me, it just tastes like weak regular milk. But soy milk and oat milk, I can't get down with.
The whole conversation fascinates me, guys, because people have a cleaner image of processed factory stuff than they do of a natural product. Right. And it blows me away. Like, almond milk, that's what should scare you. Like all the things on the side and how that's made and why it's white. That's like that. I'm with you, Sylvia. That one freaks me out.
Like
not having more milk from a cow directly.
Do you think that we get
natural to me?
Do you think we get used to institutionalize? I don't. Maybe the word not institutionalize it, but man-made things. We somehow think this better living through chemistry, where if it's man-made, it's got to be better for us. Even though you look at the Impossible Burger. It's got dozens and dozens of ingredients.
Of that stuff with
Can something with that many ingredients be good for you? I don't know, but we think it's healthier. But a cow burger is one ingredient.
It's the same thing with pharmaceuticals. I mean, we think that medicine can solve everything instead of the more natural path.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's also,
Well, one of the things we're going to talk about with Reverend Hall when he comes on next segment in just a few minutes is the biblical diet, and people eating a diet. And if you look at the biblical diet, we'll get into it more, but it's really just eating unprocessed whole foods
which
that
is
were
what they're
available.
saying we should do now.
Right. And honestly, that never seems like bad advice.
No, we seem to keep muddying the waters, don't we?
Yeah.
The whole food system does.
Oh, yeah. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. In fact, we'll talk to the Reverend next from Good Sheppard Episcopal Church. We're going to talk about Easter and all the foods of the Bible and how to eat biblically and just, where some of these foods and some of these ideas come from. Don't go anywhere. We'll come back in a minute. It's Food News and Choose Radio, sponsored by our friends at Sullivan University. Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's Food News and Choose Radio. Every once in a while, we need a little help from above. Absolutely,
I'm
right?
for all that. Yeah.
And right now, it's a very holy time. Maybe other than Christmas, the holiest time of the year.
In many ways, maybe more the holiest of times. Yeah.
Reverend John Hall of the Episcopal Church, a Good Shepherd Episcopal Church, is in with us. And we're going to talk about not just the holy time, but foods of the Bible and foods at this time of the year.
Yeah. And I got to say, that church is beautiful. It's on Bell Court. And it looks, there's something about going to a church that looks like a church.
People love to go in that space.
Yes.
And people are welcome to come into that space and often do.
It is
just
a
to sit
place.
during the week.
I go there.
Then we have a lot going on as well. So there's a lot of ways to enjoy that space.
Yeah, it's a wonderful church and just wonderful people there. I've been attending for a while now, and just
your mission too, your mission work. I'm
tons of outreach come out of that church. It's a very healthy church. I'm very honored to be there.
One to One, I think, is one of your programs where you go out into the schools and mentor children. I've done that. So
yep, there's a lot of tutoring. We now have 2 schools that we work with in the neighborhood and 2 elementary schools, and there's also a pretty expansive backpack program, so the kids have food over the weekend and so forth. So
huge outreach.
There's always something going on.
I love it. Well, but food.
Yeah, food, and here,
I am a foodie.
Well, me too. And guys, I got to admit, when it comes to Easter and this holiday, I know my granny's southern spread. That's what I know. Ham and deviled eggs and mashed potatoes or scalloped potatoes and just all the traditional stuff. But I've never really understood where that comes from, how it happened. I assume certain things like we had country hams or hams in November because slaughtering of hogs and, maybe is the spring ham, that one's not cured in any way. So maybe it's a fresh ham in the spring.
I always thought it was lamb.
There's lamb in the spring, deviled eggs. But
which does not seem very, very proper for Easter. Deviled eggs.
Deviled eggs.
Deviled eggs.
Right. The universe likes to play jokes on us, right?
Yes, but
It's a carryover from Good Friday.
So since I've already given you scalloped potato recipes and all that kind of stuff, we thought we'd talk to the expert here and see
wait to hear.
how foods kind of entered the Bible and came into tradition and brought us here today.
And a lot of us only know the foods of the Bible being wine,
Right.
and wafers.
Yeah, Jesus' first miracle.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of us know that particular food very well.
We know it very well.
Yeah. So we know bread, we know fish, we know wine, we know the stuff that you would have in that historical time back then. But what are there? We were talking off the air. Passover is also going on right now, and there are very traditional Passover foods, and there's a menu for Passover. But is there an official? Not official, but is there a biblical menu for Easter?
No, not per se. Lamb, as you mentioned, is the obvious choice. Probably the majority of the countries in the world who practice Christian faith would celebrate with lamb, which is also, not to get ahead of things too much, is also a big Pentecost. The lamb roast, if you will, is also traditional Pentecost.
What does Pentecost mean?
Pentecost in 50 days, Pentecost is the celebration of the birth of the church, the Holy Spirit coming among the people, and the birth of the church.
Can I ask a little question in general now about meat in the Bible? Because there, in Jewish faith, there's certain things you can and can't eat,
right?
Yeah.
And certain things through other religions. But if you read through the Bible, I don't remember really words of Jesus saying you can't have pigs or cows or Are there meats that are more accepting to religions? Obviously, lamb is spoken of a lot.
That does seem to
There
be
are,
multicultural.
and of course, the Bible, Old Testament, as we say, and New Testament, written over thousands of years, literally. So the sanitary laws of the Old Testament were meant to sustain the people. And so there were certain diseases and parasites that existed in pork, for instance,
salting,
that when God gave the decrees, if you will, for people not to eat pigs, then that was for a good reason,
So
to
there
keep
was some
things
guidance
sanitary,
there.
keep the people alive, and
So it
keep them
is. It's
free
in the
from
Old
disease.
Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I'd always thought there was some kind of spiritual purification going on with the kosherring process, which I'm sure takes place.
Right.
But there's also microbes and bacteria which we need to kill.
And bread is an interesting, the little work I've done and looking into it, but it's so interesting to me that bread played such a role in the wafers too. Today we
That's
take
right.
communion,
Yeah.
and bread is such an interesting, every culture has bread. Even
Right.
though today we won't eat it because it has carbs, right?
the keto communion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember even a class in seminary where which concentrated on everything having to do with the Eucharist, the Great Thanksgiving, the Greek word for Thanksgiving. So Holy Communion, as it's also called.
Sure.
So the bread, we were given an assignment of baking bread. And we had a little competition, friendly competition, and we had taste test and all that kind of thing where we brought our bread back. Well, we pulled recipes out of a hat, and the professor walked around with this bag or whatever it was, and we pulled recipes. Mine was for unleavened communion bread. And so obviously that's something you would serve during Lent. And some churches have the tradition, especially in the Northeast, of serving a little bit more of a bitter wine at communion. It's not something that you can't drink, but it's not something you want a lot of. But it is this sensual, if you will, reminder that this is a time of dissonance, even in our taste buds. I think God gave us our.
And that's during Lent.
That's during Lent.
When you're supposed to not.
It's more of a penitential season, the 40 days leading up to Easter.
Yeah. You're supposed to sacrifice.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Fast. So fasting is a way of remembering that it's through God's provision that we are truly and genuinely provided for instead of ourselves, totally.
Yeah.
So the fasting is
great tradition, actually.
The fasting is and there's a million different ways you can fast, right? You can fast from TV. You can fast. It doesn't always have to be food.
But you're discouraged from eating sweets, right?
Well,
even though that doesn't have to be.
It's not a doctrine of the church per se, but it is one go-to, like ice cream or chocolate are real common ones.
Right.
Because there is an emotional trigger that causes people to say, oh, I missed that, or I miss meat. And so we have fish on Fridays because it is a protein. So it's not asking us to be unhealthy and rob our bodies of protein or whatever it is that we need. But it is a way for us to say, I miss roast beef or whatever it is.
On Friday.
But it's a trigger to remember that God is the one who provides for us. So it's a short season, relatively.
What I find very interesting about this, we're talking about fasting, for instance, in the Bible. Sometimes we get to the right answer and we don't know why. We just know it's the right answer. So now doctors tell us how good fasting is for our body.
Yeah.
Then they had no idea medically it was good for your body. It just seemed like the right thing to do. They knew to do it. And now we know, there are really medical benefits, according to a lot of doctors, to fasting, and they were doing it thousands of years ago with no basis of knowledge of it. It just, you know what I mean? And now we're finding out they knew what they were doing.
There's a lot going on there. You're right. There's this physical side to our nourishment, and there's also the spiritual side to our nourishment. And fasting has to do with all that. I would say one huge, obvious difference is the processed foods that we have now. So some people may just say, I want to fast from processed foods.
I think that's a good idea.
That's a great one. They go to have barbecue fried chicken.
I think that's like
local.
Chef, what is
the
unleavened
call sign
bread?
of our show is just don't eat processed food.
What is unleavened bread? Yeah. What is unleavened?
It doesn't have a leaven or like yeast or baking soda,
it's
no
flat
chemical
bread.
or
it's grainy.
So it would be a cracker. Really, it'd be cracker-like, right?
It's very well. And the bread that I baked which won second place, by the way.
We are with a star.
But that's out of 8 students in that class. It is lacking, intentionally lacking. There's a piece that's missing out of it.
I love this notion.
I like
I've
that
never
idea.
thought about that until you talked about the bitterness of the wine.
Yeah.
And how that's a purposeful thing, whereas the bread is purposely bad, probably, right? And not
meant to be
meant
tasty.
to take with communion or maybe a meal.
But it fascinates me how you can use food to kind of create an exclamation point, to instill emotion. You can get a feeling from that, like, okay, this is bitter, and I guess they're doing it so you feel it. Like
That's
sometimes
right.
I make a dish spicy because I want you to remember it. I want you to feel the dish while you're eating it.
That's right. That's right.
And the gradations of the religions. Like I was raised Southern Baptist.
Okay.
We just ate fried chicken all the time. There was no
That's a good chart.
Lent.
Wednesday and
That was an
Sunday.
option. I would have converted.
It wasn't an option. But in the gradations of the religions, do most of the Protestant religions do communion and do Lent? How does that all work?
I would say it varies, and I would say for the most part, unless you're in an Orthodox or Roman Catholic or Episcopal, there are obviously exceptions to what I'm saying, but those tend to be the ones that tend to stick to that.
Going back to the unprocessed food. So I remember a few years ago, there's a documentary called A Year of Living Biblically, where someone went on a biblical.
I remember that.
Yeah, they went on
the Bible diet.
So they went on the Bible. So I actually was just Googling it. And when you look at what they consider the Bible diet, it really is just whole unprocessed foods. Like, it's like
Mediterranean diet.
Right. Mediterranean. Lots of fruit, figs, no sugar, but they use honey or date honey.
Barley was in there too.
Fish, seafood, bread, but things that are unprocessed.
I've got it right the first time. We don't really need to
And
to
man
mess
is
with
kind
it.
of messed up because that's the way we should all be eating all the time anyway.
It's called the 7 foods of the Bible.
Yes, you're right.
And there's 7 of them.
I like that.
And it doesn't include processed food, which a lot of people say bread has been corrupted by modern processing.
What was bread 2,000 years ago was probably very different than what was bread now.
Oh, yeah.
This one's an off-the-wall question, but I'm just curious, John. You may not even know this. What is manna, and how would that would be referred to on Earth? You know what I mean?
So there are different ways to define manna. Manna was the gift that was given to people to feed them. And some people say that it is a product of birds or pigeons or doves or whatever that somehow was safe to eat and had the nourishment that they needed.
Fried chicken.
Yeah.
We keep going back to that.
I consider that manna.
That's where the Baptists stopped. We read that part.
And some people think about it as some form of bread or whatever.
Gotcha, okay.
But it's the spiritual essence of what that did in terms of sustenance.
Right, yeah, because I hear it referred to. I've never really understood. I always considered it maybe like a perfect food, like something made specifically to nourish a human being.
I think one of the beautiful things about the symbolism of manna is that it's something that was new to them and yet not new to God. That God knew how to take care of God's people. Mm-hmm. And on faith, they ate this substance, and it sustained them.
Now, let me ask you about Good Friday, which this is on Saturday.
Today's Maundy, Thursday, just for the record, and Good Friday tomorrow. Yeah.
That's right, but on their show, it's actually, I guess our podcast will be released.
Anytime.
So,
so if you're listening on the radio right now, technically it's Saturday, but we record on Thursday. Yeah. Does every day have a name?
Holy Saturday. So Maundy, Maundy, which comes from the Old English word mandate, and that is that from the 13th chapter of John's Gospel that Jesus mandated, if you will, that we would serve one another. So that's when the foot washing is, and it's only in John's Gospel, which was written about 100 years later than the other Gospels.
And does that take place on a particular Holy Week's a big deal? Is
right.
there different
You got
foods
Palm Sunday, which we just had this last Sunday, where we go from, it's Palm Passion, so we go from hosannas. Jesus is arriving in town on a donkey, and we lay cloaks and palm branches like as if he is a king, right? And he is a king. Mm-hmm. And then it changes very quickly into Pilate saying, "Who do you want me, to send to death?" And is it Barabbas, who was a noted criminal, or is it Jesus? Mm-hmm. And the people say Jesus. So crucify Jesus. So the whole week is the Passion Week leading up to Maundy, Thursday, where Jesus has the Last Supper, and which was customary in Jewish, the Passover meal. Right? And then Good Friday is the crucifixion, around noon to 3, probably. And then there's a time of vigil.
Okay.
And Holy Saturday is a time of waiting and prayers. And then when the sun goes down on Saturday night, we have the beautiful, beautiful service, once a year, obviously, of Easter Vigil. And traditionally that is a long service. In Orthodox traditions, they have an agape feast as a part of that in the middle of the night.
What food is associated with each of those days?
Just everything.
In the middle of the night?
Everything, yeah. A lot of times like
Can we pull this off? I mean, we only have a couple of days.
Yep.
It sounds like fun.
You can look.
It's called agape.
We can put this on the calendar next year.
Agape.
Agape. It's another Greek word, agape. It just means abundance, and it's a love-based feast that we share together. And then Easter Sunday is, of course, the day of the resurrection, and we celebrate.
And we eat.
We eat in America
deviled eggs and ham and lamb.
Yeah,
and
in
all
America,
kinds of, it's your brunch.
The South, there's more than Easter just in the southern United States with the foods we eat. There's got to be other cultures and traditions that
there are. I was talking to a woman this week from the Middle East who's a member of our church, and she is preparing for her family. She said usually they have lamb.
Yeah.
Which is what I grew up with on Easter down south in Louisiana.
Did you? Okay.
It was the only time of year we ate lamb.
Did your neighbors, was that a common thing? Because, I mean, even here, I don't think lamb is a very prominent thing.
No, it was a seasonal. It came in, the butcher would say, we have lamb, Easter lamb. Yeah.
That's what's best.
So we would have that. But anyway, she said she was going to do ham this year. Uh-huh. And that they were going to keep some of their traditions, which two of them in particular I loved. She described taking grape leaves, putting minced lamb, spices, and rice, and boiling those in a pot.
It's like a dolma.
Yeah.
And so very traditional. And then these cookies that are like crown cookies, that's my word, but there's a ball of dough, and she takes her thumb and she pinches it so that you can make a crown. She has a special tool to make that impression.
And I think those are made with an almond paste
That's
as
right.
well. Yeah,
That's right.
Well, when is Ramadan? When is that? I can't remember. Is it? I should remember
I'd have to
this.
look. I don't know.
But it all of these religions kind of fall into the same period of time.
Same God. Same
and just
same,
have
same
different
time frame.
same
A lot of
orientation.
big things happen in the same way because all these
And it
people
always
were
has to do with
together at the
feasts.
same
Yeah,
time.
and of course,
Feasts.
spring being a time of new life,
Bounty.
resurrection. I mean, just look around people's yards and
Eggs.
the flowers and the tulips and
the
yeah.
weeds.
And the weeds.
That'll preach.
This might be a really dumb question, but I've never thought.
No
of it.
dumb questions.
Well, do we know what kind of food Jesus ate? I mean, we always hear about bread and
Oh,
wine.
That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah,
with the
let-
question
let
before,
Let me
like,
throw a question into
what
that.
did the man eat? 'Cause
I
I wanna
read
model
that he
after
was a
that.
vegetarian.
Well,
I never heard
I don't know.
I
that.
did. I read that somewhere.
I don't know.
Fake
We don't-
news.
Well, back then in general, people didn't eat a lot of meat because it was just hard to come by. So their
Yeah,
diet was
probably.
mainly grain.
So that may be where Sylvia's getting that.
Yeah.
So
But
that may
you
not
know,
be far off. the
lamb
mark.
is mentioned in
Yeah.
the Bible.
I wonder what was at the
But
Last
I've always
Supper.
wanted to know
Yeah.
that from a spiritual standpoint, the acceptance of that. Because if you look at the teachings of Jesus and a lot of religion, taking a life is not a good thing. Now, there's processes to taking a life of an animal for
For
food, but I
sacrifice,
just
yeah.
didn't know. Sometimes I'm still on the fence, guys, and I'm a chef. I work with dead animals all the time, but every now and then, the humanity of it, gets to me.
Sure. Yeah, and they said the sacrifice of a lamb, I guess, is why lamb has become having to do with Passover.
Yes,
It does, and
symbolic.
also the Good Shepherd image or metaphor.
Yeah, the Good
is-
Shepherd.
and
is
at Passover,
meaningful.
the blood of the lamb was
That-
used.
that's right.
So there's historical.
There's an
significance.
offering. Jesus is
Right.
is the offering.
Yeah.
The
So, yeah.
sacrificial offering.
I've just always
Keep
wondered,
searching
like,
for that little line that says it's okay to have a 16-ounce ribeye every now and then.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Well, and in American, I've traveled a little bit, and I've lived overseas a little bit, and one thing I noticed when I came back to the States was we put a lot of prominence on meat being the main entree part of the entree.
Center
The
of the
rest
plate.
of the plate lines up around that. Even the drink, right? But in a lot of countries, there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and meat may be on the menu. And my sense is that Jesus didn't have like a spiral ham, obviously, but or a
Honey
lamb
baked.
or whatever, and then all these little accoutrements. It was probably more like if there was meat available, and it might be quail or whatever, then it was available.
well, it's a lot like Thanksgiving. They didn't eat turkey at Thanksgiving, turkey and stuffing. They
Right.
didn't-
Yeah, that's an
Mayors was
American.
coming over with his mac and cheese.
Is there any record of what the Last Supper or what was on the table? Is it just people?
I mean,
conjecture?
we could look back through Jewish history and pretty well guess.
But it
what
probably
might-
would have been an unleavened bread. It probably would have been like a grape. We what we call wine probably wasn't a lot like the wine we drink
Figs
today.
and nuts.
Figs and nuts. Maybe
Yeah.
some fish. Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, Sylvia was talking about that. She was like 7 or 9 actual foods of the
7
Bible.
foods of the
like
Bible,
wheat
yeah.
and barley and
Something
Grapes.
sweet with honey. And,
Yeah.
and there's all this meta-narrative going on through that historically. So the foods represent different parts of God's deliverance of God's people and the journey that was made. So there's a whole story, right,
Really?
that goes along with all of this.
Could
Yeah.
I find reference to that? I'd like to read that.
Yeah.
Oh, of course. Yeah,
Okay.
you can.
Thank you.
I mean,
That'd be
I'll be glad to help you
Yeah,
find that,
because,
but
like,
you can just start Googling.
Moses did something with the parting. I'm trying to reconstruct from my early childhood what all this is, but
Yeah.
I know when I was reading about bread, bread is played a big role.
Oh,
because
bread,
Jesus handed
bread,
out the
and a
bread.
lot of
Remember, the
cultures
bread got
still-
multiplied.
Yeah, the fishes and loaves
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah.
And that's an extremely important story that's in the Gospels. But yeah, I think bread serves as a center to a lot of meals around the world, in many countries. And I would have to think that that'd be something if the disciples are mobile and Jesus is traveling from town to town. That's something that they could carry if they carried anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had to think about the dynamics of the day, carrying something, having something non-perishable, sustainable. And then also, I mean, this is not exactly early into agriculture, but it's not like they had factory farms back then. So, grain had to be the sustaining starch, rice in other parts of the world. So as much as you can do with the flour.
Well, grain is something that you could save. And in times of famine, like in Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis 37, the story of Joseph, and Joseph's beautiful long journey of going from literally being in the pit to being the one in charge of the food, of the granary. And so that his brothers come and they don't recognize him, right, if you remember the story. And they have grain on hand to send back to feed the people, So it's God's full circle of providence that happens there. But it's the grain that is able to be preserved that they use to feed. Yeah. So you can live off these wonderful, beautiful grains.
It was our first convenience food.
The fruits of your harvest.
Yeah. I can talk about this all day. It's really interesting. Reverend John Hall, Good Shepherd Episcopal Church.
Thank you.
A happy Easter and Holy Week day, and thank you for coming in this week and talking to us.
What a pleasure to be with you guys.
Service details for Sunday, if you can.
Yeah.
Well, sure. Well, we have, again, the Easter Vigil. If you're hearing this on Saturday, then it'll start at 7 o'clock at Good Shepherd, 533 East Main. And then we have 4 Easter services. We have 7:30, 9, and then a big, huge Easter egg hunt of 1,000+ eggs on Bell Court at
I've
10.
done that, yeah.
And then the third morning service will be at 11, so 7:30, 9, 11,
Is
and
the
then
7:30
5
the
o'clock.
sunrise service? Is that?
It's not a sunrise service.
Okay.
It'll be inside, and it's so those 4 services: 7:30, 9, 11, and 5 p.m. in the church.
And we'll link on our Facebook page all this information so you can find the church and find the Reverend. And thank you so much.
Yeah,
oh my gosh,
great.
what
It
a
flies
pleasure.
by.
I feel like I've met new friends.
That's
Already
why
knew
this show
Sylvia and
exists.
Jeremy. Thank
All
you,
right,
Twitch.
Thank
back
you.
in a moment. It's Food News and Choose Radio.